Hey folks, this is Ken Lince. I'm a data center technology specialist here at Microsoft and wanted to do a quick demo of the Enterprise Mobility Suite, in this session specifically Azure Active Directory Premium. So as you can see from the slide here, the Enterprise Mobility Suite is comprised of a number of different capabilities and features. Hybrid identity, mobile device management, access and information protection. Those are a function of Azure AD Premium for hybrid identity, Windows Intune for mobile device management, and then rights management services up in Azure for information protection. So we will focus in this particular session around specifically on the Azure AD Premium piece of that. One slide I'll show real quick here is the slide that talks about the different offerings that we have currently as of the date that I'm recording this particular presentation. But you can set up an Azure subscription, a trial subscription, or use any subscription that you're currently paying for, and you can go to the Azure Active Directory section in Microsoft in the Microsoft Azure Portal and set up an Active Directory tenant. And you can do that for free. And you can do the directory synchronization, meaning that you can sync your on-prem Active Directory to Azure to create this hybrid identity, and you get a subset of features that are available there. And you can see those as a common features across the board. We introduced a couple months ago a SKU called AD Basic, which allows cloud users that you create in the cloud, not users that exist on-prem that have been synchronized through the directory synchronization process to Azure, but users that you have created in the cloud. Those users can now do a self-service password reset, and of course we'll reset that password in the cloud. This would be a more common scenario for, say, an Office 365 customer that hasn't done a directory synchronization process. They just have everything up in the cloud. So anyway, that's what that would be used for. The AD Premium piece provides that password reset all the way back on-prem, which a lot of folks are very interested in, but it also includes a number of different other features and capabilities, multi-factor authentication, obviously the self-service password change all the way back to on-prem, the ability to do some self-service group management, which we'll show as a part of the demo. We have a web application proxy that lives in Microsoft Azure now, and it also includes, we won't really get into this as a part of the demo, but it also includes our Forefront Identity Manager, which is the enterprise identity management solution that we have here at Microsoft. As of today, I think last week actually, we released a community technology preview of what's called Microsoft Identity Manager, which will be the next version of our identity management solution. And that's also included in this subscription model. So enough of that. This slide will be available, or this deck will be available for download. Just check the comment section. So the first thing that I wanted to focus on here, the first part of the demo, is really kind of the end-user scenario. And so the way I have this set up is, this is a virtual machine running Windows 8 that's out in Azure. And the reason I did it that way was so that it could have internet connectivity. But in this particular case, it's not domain joined. So this is sort of represents a BYO type scenario where this could be, obviously this is a Windows device, but this could certainly be an iPad or an Android device or something like that as well. Just easy to do the demo here with a Windows device. So the first thing that I'll show here is, this is just a link to, this is a URL. And so the first thing that I'll show here, this is the access panel, or we call the My Apps portal. So what we're going to do here in this, what we're trying to solve for essentially is to allow this user to log into a website, this access panel, with their domain credentials, and we're going to force multi-factor authentication against that login because this user is outside of the firewall, they're on the extranet, and we want to be able to provide this access panel that gives them the ability to use their domain credentials to access all kinds of different applications, Office 365, on-premise SharePoint, maybe some other applications that we'll show that we can federate to using SAML federation, that we can do all the heavy lifting in Azure, etc. So the URL for that is myapps.microsoft.com, and we'll get to the part of the demo here where we show how to set the backend piece of this up. And then in my demo scenario, which I'm trying to emulate really what a lot of customers do, which is an on-premise component with Active Directory Federation server implementation, and that Federation server has been federated to Microsoft Azure Office 365, and my custom domain that I'm using is emsdemo.net. So one of the things we can do with this URL is, since I'm federated to Microsoft Azure and Office 365, we can allow users to connect to this particular URL, myapps.microsoft.com, append it with a federated domain name, and they'll get this experience here. So if we click on this and open it up, what will happen is this will go directly to my ADFS page, right? So the user is going to log in using, this is ADFS, right? So the benefit of them doing that is that they pick up this token, and now they, for as long as this web session is open, they have single sign-on into all the different applications that they need to get access to. So what we'll do here is log in. And what you'll see here is that I'm being prompted for multi-factor authentication. And so when I click continue here, I'll jump out to my Windows device or an iPad device that I've downloaded the multi-factor authentication application for whatever platform, whatever device that I'm using. And in this particular scenario, the way I have it set up, it's set up to do a push notification to the device. So it'll push the notification out, ask us to verify. Once we click verify from the device that's registered to this particular user, then we'll be granted access to the website. So let me jump over to some devices here and show you what that experience looks like. Now, real quick, before we jump over to the devices and show that multi-factor authentication experience from the device, I want to show something from the ADFS side. So this is a little bit of the plumbing on the back end. One of the things you can do with the multi-factor authentication server is to hook that into your ADFS on-prem. So one of the features with Azure AD Premium is that you get to download this Azure multi-factor authentication server component. You download that server, you can run it on something on-prem, and then you can use this ADFS adapter to hook that into your Windows Server 2012 R2 ADFS servers. And that's what I've done in this particular case here. So once this is hooked into your ADFS server, then you can go out to ADFS, go to the authentication policy, you can edit the global multi-factor authentication policy, and now you can basically build out whatever the scenario is that you want for your end users. So you have a case here where perhaps maybe the domain admins group, you want to force multi-factor authentication. Anytime that they're connecting to something that requires them to authenticate against the ADFS server, we're going to force a multi-factor authentication against anybody in this group, regardless of their connectivity scenario. If they're outside the network, inside the network, on something that's domain joined, on an iPad, anything, we're going to force a multi-factor authentication for that. From a devices perspective, so this is really around a concept called Workplace Join that's available in Windows Server 2012 R2. And this is a light domain join that allows us essentially to push a certificate to the device. So, primarily this scenario here would be you could, suppress, so somebody on an iPad or on an Android device or on a Windows device that's not domain join, they could opt in to this workplace join, and they would usually do that through this process where you're using Windows Intune and you want to actually manage the device. So the first step to that essentially is to do this workplace join. We push the certificates down, then Windows Intune can manage the device later. But they're mutually exclusive. You can just do a workplace join. In this particular scenario, once you do that, we push a certificate down, and then you can basically you say, okay, well, I know that this is a device that one of my users is using, and to make that experience a little bit easier for them, if they register the device, we can suppress a multi-factor authentication login. So you can set this so that to say that an unregistered device, for example, will force a multi-factor authentication, and that would be anywhere. That'd be inside the firewall, outside the firewall, any of those scenarios. The scenario that I want to use here is an extranet, so anything outside the firewall. Regardless of what the connectivity scenario is, or regardless of what the device scenario is, right? If you're outside the firewall, we're going to force multi-factor authentication against that login. So now we'll jump over to the devices and kind of give you what the experience looks like on the device. All right, so here's our first device scenario. This is my my Windows Phone, and we've obviously downloaded the multi-factor authentication app, runs on the device, and then we push this notification. If you remember, we were at the ADFS login screen, we provided our credentials, we were in extranet scenario, so we were asked for that second factor of authentication. We click continue. We get this push notification to our device that says to verify cancel, or most importantly, that we can cancel it and report fraud if we haven't initiated that, whatever that login would be. So it's kind of a nice feature to have if somebody's compromised. Obviously, once they get to the second factor authentication, they've already provided the correct username and password. So if a user reports fraud, then it basically locks the account up, and the administrator has to come in and go out to the portal and re-enable the user account to be able to access those services. So nice feature that we have there. Now let me switch over. I'll show you what it looks like on the iPad, the experience over there. All right, so now I'm over here on my iPad, and very similar experience. You can go out to the App Store, the Apple App Store, download the multi-factor authentication app. You can run it on your iPad. In this particular case, I'll go ahead and say verify so that we, once we go back to the web page, we'll be logged into the Access Portal. The other scenario that I wanted to show real quick too is we have an OAuth token scenario, which is like a secure ID, hard token kind of a scenario thing, but you don't have to carry around some kind of a key fob to be able to do that. So I'll show you during the demo as well the Access Portal, or the user portal for the multi-factor authentication service, and users can go in and set, can predetermine that if you have a specific scenario that you want to use and you want to force that scenario, but you also have the ability to allow users, or give the users the ability to pick whatever scenario works best for them. So they can get a phone call or a text message, they can use the push notification scenario, or they can actually use this token scenario. So instead of at the web page getting a prompt to hit continue and send a push notification, they'll just see a text box where they'll enter their authentication code, and as you can see from the screen here, that's refreshing itself every 30 seconds. So they use their device, put the code in, and then we'll pass them through. Once we get to the user portal, I'll show you how the users can register their devices and things like that. But this is the iPad experience here. All right, so now we're back over on our BYO device. If you remember, we were logged in here as our friend Han Solo, the internet-connected device. And we perform multi-factor authentication. We verify that from our iPad. And so now we're in the Access Portal. And so you can see a number of different tiles here that I'm able to use to log into various different web services, SaaS services, using my corporate credentials. And so two of the first ones here are for Office 365. So in my demo lab, I'm also an Office 365 customer. And I've taken the Office 365 Azure AD backend. So if you didn't know, the backend for Office 365 is Azure Active Directory. So we can bring that Office 365 tenant that we already have into the Azure management portal so we can manage it there, turn on the AD Premium features, and leverage all the plumbing, all the work that we've done to get Office 365 up and running. So any user that has an Office 365 license assigned to them will automatically see the tiles here, and we can click on those, and obviously we get this very nice single sign-in access over to our SharePoint Online environment, for example. Dynamic CRM also back-ended with Azure AD, so we can bring that in as well, and any users that are users over in the Dynamics CRM system, they now have access to that as well. The other thing that we can do here is through the Web Application Proxy, right? So we can expose stuff like our on-prem SharePoint scenario. So this is a SharePoint server that's running on-prem, and we publish that through the Web Application Proxy. And of course, we have our Office 365 SharePoint over here as well. We can also pick, this is just another WAP, this is just an IIS server that I have running behind the firewall, and I just changed the default page to show that this is a web server behind my firewall that I published using the Web Application Proxy. So you can see up here we get this. This is a resolvable. We're using this through the access panel, but this is actually a URL that you could use from anywhere. So you could copy and paste this URL and send it in an email or something to somebody, and as long as they had the right credentials, they would be able to log in through the access port or through the Web Application Proxy. So you don't have to Swiss cheese a firewall or do anything like that. We do all that stuff through Azure. And basically the app proxy, I'll show you this when we get into the back end piece of the demo, but there's a proxy agent that you download, run behind the firewall. That proxy agent registers with Azure and basically just handles all the name resolution for you on your on-prem. Some of the other stuff here as well too. So I'll show this. This gets really interesting when we show some of the back-end piece of this, but I'll click on this salesforce.com and show you how we can do SAML federation. And in this particular scenario, and I chose Salesforce because they allow you to set up a dev account that lasts for more than 30 days or 60 days. But obviously Salesforce allows you to set up single sign-on, and so we can actually do all the heavy lifting for this in Azure. So even if you don't have ADFS servers on-prem, or maybe you do, but you just don't want to deal with doing the federation and having that being dependent upon your infrastructure, you can set that up in Azure, and I'll show you what that looks like on the back end. So within this access panel, we've been able to log into Office 365, we've been able to log into our CRM system, we've been able to log into a couple different apps that are running behind the firewall on-prem. The other thing we can do here as well, and I'll show you this particular scenario. So there are some apps like Twitter, for example, that don't do SAML federation. You can't go to Twitter and enable single sign-on. So there's a credential for every user. An email address essentially is their username and then their password. And so in an example for something like Twitter or Facebook, if a company has some social media presence and they want to be able to provide access to that to internal or to corporate employees using their domain credentials, this is how you can enable that kind of a scenario. So I can click on this because I have access, and it basically just redirects me into my Twitter account. And so this would be the corp Twitter account. Of course, somebody could start to post and do all the stuff that they wanted to do there. Now, what's interesting in the AD Premium piece is that from an IT perspective, I can just push all the administration for this particular group and who has access to the corporate Twitter to users, right? And say, okay, now you can just log into the access panel and I'll present this group to you, and the users can create groups and do that kind of stuff too if they have access to do that, and allow you to manage the membership for that group. So we will enumerate all the IDs that have been synced from on-prem or IDs that exist in the cloud, and somebody can click on those and add those to have access to this particular tile, to the corporate Twitter tile. So the next time they log into the panel, they have access. Now we can also set groups up so that you can have this approval process. So you can just set groups up so people can just join them, and then they would have access to these tiles, for example, if that's the scenario that you were trying to solve for. Or you can have an approval process where somebody can attempt to join, and then somebody can come in and say, I'm going to deny that request, or I'm going to approve that request. So that's what that looks like. And then kind of the final scenario here is I have this set up for Yammer, but we actually do support SAML Federation to Yammer. But in this particular case, maybe you just have a handful of people that are using Yammer, and you want to be able to provide single sign-on access to them. Maybe you're not, the actual credentials that they're using aren't your domain credentials and you haven't set up any kind of federation, but you want to provide single sign-on because you know people are using that. So they can click on the tile, they put in their whatever their credentials are one time, and we'll cache those credentials. And then from that point on, once they put their credentials in, then we'll allow them to click on that tile. They can log into Yammer using their basically corporate credentials. So obviously the nice part about this is just from a user provisioning, deprovisioning scenario is that it's really all a function of Active Directory. So that's one of the first things. If people move into different groups within the company, they change roles, or they leave the company, obviously one of the first things, and almost always gets removed, or the access changes by security group, is their Active Directory user account. And so having that sort of driving the back end piece of that is obviously very attractive to a lot of folks, because as we all know, folks get provisioned when they come into the company in a lot of different systems, and then when they leave, most often don't get deprovisioned in all of those as well. So making those a function of their Active Directory credential is pretty nice. All right, so let's jump over to the next part of the demo here. All right, so now we're back over here at the Azure Portal. So I'm logged in as my administrator in the Azure Portal, and now we'll give you a little bit of insight into the back end of some of this stuff here. So one of the first things I was telling you guys about was the ability, if you're an Office 365 customer, the ability to bring that directory into Azure for management. So it's pretty simple to do. You just log into the Azure Portal, you focus here over on the Active Directory component, you say New, Directory, Custom Create, just basically take the defaults. And one of the options that you get here is the ability to use an existing directory. So you would basically click this, say I'm ready to be signed out, and then it says after you're signed out, you need to sign in as a global admin of the directory that you want to add, and then just follow the instructions. So you would need to sign back in as the global admin for your Office 365 tenant, and that would be something like, you know, admin at company.onmicrosoft.com, whatever that credential would be, and you could of course have set up other ones, and you could use any of those credentials as well. But anyway, once that is done, once you have gone through this process, then your Office 365 Azure AD backend will show up here as one of the Active Directory tenants, and you can double click into that. And if you've set up directory integration and ADFS and all of that stuff, then all of that will be here. You'll see that in this particular case, I'm activated for directory synchronization. I'm configured for single sign-on through ADFS. Here's my custom domains. I've got all that information there. If you've already done all that in Office 365, then that'll just show up over here in the Azure portal, and you won't have to do anything else for that. Now, the next step you'd need to do would be to go over to the licensing tab, and you would need to activate the AD Premium trial or turn that feature on, and then you would need to come into the AD Premium license and then assign users that you want to have access to AD Premium. You would assign those users that way. Now, the one thing that's important to do here is whatever, in this particular case, my hotmail.com, that's my kind of organizational ID, that's what I'm logged into the portal as and what I'm managing, that user needs to be assigned an AD Premium license. Otherwise, when you're logged into the portal, you won't see any of the AD Premium features. So some folks tend to skip that from time to time, thinking that their admin doesn't need an AD Premium license, and then, of course, when you log in, you don't see any of the AD Premium features. So once you have that assigned, then that's pretty simple to do that. Now, you can also do this by groups, which is obviously a lot easier. So you can pick groups that you have, and you can assign by particular groups. So if there's in these, you can see here many of these, say local Active Directory, for example, these have been synchronized from on-prem to Azure. So users that we've added on-prem, when they sync up to Azure, this membership obviously is intact, and you can assign users based on groups here, which is obviously a little bit easier to do. So now we go back into the directory here. Now I was going to show you a little bit about some of the AD Premium features. So if you go to Configure, once you have AD Premium turned on, this is where you'll see all of the different features that are available from an AD Premium perspective. So we do have the ability to do some custom branding, for example. So this would be like the Office 365 portal, or the Azure portal or the Intune portal or something like that, where if somebody's just doing everything through the cloud, then we can kind of customize that experience a little bit. Now, if you're using ADFS, then they'll be redirected. If you're federated using ADFS, then they'll be redirected to the ADFS login page, obviously, once they type in their username. But anyway, the custom branding scenario exists and is available. You can see a lot of different stuff out here. I won't go through all these, but we've got a user password reset policy. You can turn that on or off. And then there's some other features here. Some of these things you'll see pop up from time to time, these preview features, and you can play around with those. You get a help icon over here that you can click on to learn more about any of these features over here. You can set, but when you do self-service password reset, you can have multiple authentication methods, and you can decide which one of those or multiple of those that you want to use. This is kind of a nice feature when a user accesses that access panel or that My Apps portal for the first time. You can walk them through a registration process where they would put in an alternate email, for example, put in phone numbers, all that kind of stuff. All kinds of different things in here. I was going to show down here we actually do the workplace join up in Azure as well. If you want to enable that scenario, that's in preview. The group management, to be able to turn that on for your users, that's the available. Available through the portal here, and that's how you would turn that on. Here's the application proxy. You can turn this feature on. Here's the link to download the application proxy piece there. You'd run on-prem, and all kinds of other stuff here too. So that's what that looks like. And then if we bounce over here to the applications, these are the applications that are available to my users in that access panel, in that myapps.microsoft.com portal. So how do we add those applications? Well, we'd come down here to the bottom, we'd click Add, and we've got several different options here. The first is if you are developing an app and you want to integrate that application, whether it's a kind of a native app or a thick client app or a web app, if you want to enable multi-factor Azure Active Directory integration into that application, we'll walk you through the process of how to do that. The bottom option here, and this is, at least at the time of this recording, is still a preview feature. This is the Web Application Proxy. So when you click on that and you just type in some random name here that it will check, then this is where we'll create that proxy URL. One of the most recent features we added within the last couple weeks, I believe around the TechEd Europe timeframe a few weeks ago, was some pre-authentication. So you can actually do pre-authentication to the applications using the Azure Active Directory. We used to just have a pass-through option. And then here's where you just type in HTTP. In my case, I showed the internal SharePoint example, and my URL was just HTTP SharePoint. So I just typed in HTTP SharePoint, and then we published this. And now it shows up as an app in here. So here's the WAP app here, the Azure WAP, just the demo. Here's the corporate internal SharePoint site, and then we can just assign users to that, right? So we can go to the groups, and we could just say whatever groups we want to have access that particular scenario. The one that I wanted to show here real quick was showed you guys the Salesforce.com example, and I'll show you this because we have about, at least right now, about 55, 60 applications that support the ability to do more advanced scenarios like using Azure AD single sign-on and doing user provisioning scenarios and things like that. And Salesforce.com is a really good example of that. So you'll see this option here at the top where it allows you to do single sign-on. So you do, set up Salesforce for SAML Federation, and then we will actually walk you through the process here. Once you set up SAML Federation in Salesforce, they give you a URL that your users obviously use to connect to their, to your custom Salesforce.com. And then we'll walk you through the whole process here. So there's a link here that gives you all the screenshots of what you need to do on the Salesforce side, all the stuff you need to do on the Azure side. Here's the certificate that you need to download and upload over in Salesforce.com. Here's the ability to copy and paste some URLs that you need to, or copy from here and paste over at the Salesforce side. And then once that's done, the app is now published and you can assign users. So let's just go to users instead. Ideally, you'll want to assign groups, and I'll give you an example of that here in a second, because this is one of the scenarios that we provide with Salesforce.com as an example. So once you set up the SAML Federation, we'll expose all the different roles that are available in Salesforce.com. So you could set up a scenario like I have here where I've got a security group on premise that says, these are Salesforce.com users and their systems administrator role permissions. So as a part of the user provisioning process, or somebody changes roles in the company and now they need that kind of an access, we add their account or move their account over to the security group that says, hey, you're a Salesforce.com systems administrator. The directory synchronization process syncs that out to Azure AD, and we've taken that group in Azure AD and assigned it to Salesforce.com with this particular permission set or this role. So now, as soon as we provision that user, as soon as the directory synchronization process takes place on schedule, or if you do it manually or however you want to do that, the user now, when they log into the access panel, they'll see that Salesforce tile, they'll click on it, and they'll have the appropriate level of permissions out in Salesforce.com. So, some really cool scenarios that we can solve for with stuff like that. So if we bounce back over here, let me just show you some of the other options here for single sign-on. The password single sign-on is kind of like that, corporate Twitter example where you don't really, you can't do SAML federation there, so there is a static username and password. Maybe we want to cache that password and we want to make that app available to people using their domain credentials. Pretty straightforward. Could also be a scenario where maybe you can do SAML federation, but you just haven't done it or you don't want to do it, but you still want to provide access to that application through the panel, and then users can self-service that like I showed in the Yammer example. The bottom option here is for existing single sign-on, and this means that you already have ADFS or some other kind of a federation solution, and you have already set up the federation. So it's totally possible using ADFS, for example, if you have that running on-prem, to set up ADFS to Salesforce.com, and maybe you already have that set up, but you still want to provide access through the panel, provide a tile there for users to access that. So instead of using the up here, we use the URL directly to Salesforce.com. Down here, we would actually use a URL that would point to our ADFS server. So whatever that published URL is, we would use that, and then that would provide the single sign-on experience. So those are the different options that we currently have available there from a single sign-on perspective. So on that last option, so for stuff like, hey, I'm already publishing this through ADFS on-prem, why would I even want to, put that in the access panel, or what benefit does that provide? Well, first of all, obviously it provides a single place to go for all kinds of different things, right? For stuff that's you publish through the application proxy, so stuff on-prem, different Office 365 and all the different apps that people are using. But one of the really nice benefits is some of the reporting that we provide here as a part of AD Premium. So at the top of the reporting tab up here, you'll see a lot of these reports that we just kind of focus them under this anomalous activity section. And you can see the different reports there, right? So people that are signing in from unknown sources, sign-ins after multiple failures, sign-ins from multiple geographies. So somebody signs in to, the application portal from Europe, and then 5 minutes later they're signing in from California, right? Not possible, not physically possible to do that. And that would be really impossible, really hard, if not impossible, to track if you were just publishing a URL from your ADFS server, right? You would probably never know that scenario ever existed. But because we're doing cloud at scale, and because we know things like sign-ins from IP addresses with suspicious activity, well, we have a lot of people signing in to all the different properties that we manage, and so we know what those IP addresses are for people that are doing bad things, and so we can, report on that kind of information as well. Activity logs, just audit reporting, people that are using password reset, group activity, any of the stuff that we were talking about there before. Here's a nice one too that people like to use. It just shows how people are using these applications that we're publishing in the portal. So what you can see here, these are all the apps that we have published, these are the users that we have assigned to those, and these are the number of times that somebody has actually connected to any of those particular services. So we can come in here and say we publish these apps. I see that Han has accessed this 22 times in the last 30 days here, and the last time that he accessed it was the 25th of yesterday, basically. And so we can obviously download these reports into Excel format and use these however we want to use those. But we've actually worked with customers that have been able to make some procurement decisions based on some of the information that they're getting here. Hey, I'm buying 100 or 500 licenses to some SaaS service, and I'm not really sure how people are using that. Who's using it? I know we're assigning the rights to the application or to access that service, but we're not really sure how many people are using it and at what frequency level they're actually using that application. So this gives you the ability to do that, where if people are just connecting to whatever those services were that you have set up without using the access panel, you may never get to know that kind of information, right? So anyway, that's what that whole, the experience there from a reporting perspective, and then certainly just from the application perspective as well. One of the other things that we can do here is set up the multi-factor authentication provider scenario. So if you go click into that, you can bounce out to another, it'll open up another tab here where we'll go into the management section here. And so here's where you can basically manage this from the cloud. This is where you would do the download. I was showing you guys the multi-factor authentication server that you can download and run that on-prem. You can see that you can run it on all kinds of different stuff here. And then you can also just take a look at how people are using the multi-factor authentication service. By the way, when you run this on-prem, you don't. Let's see. Let's pick the 8 here. When you run this on-prem, you don't need to. I'll just run a sample report here to show the number of authentications, the number that were authenticated, the number that were denied, all that kind of stuff. So this is all you can get access to all that. But anyway, when you run the multi-factor server on-prem, you don't need to tie it into your phone system or anything like that. The server, when you install it on-prem, it registers with the Azure service, so all the phone calls, all the stuff that takes place there, all takes place up in the cloud. You just have to obviously have some internet connectivity from the multi-factor authentication servers to the internet or to Azure, basically, to enable these kinds of scenarios. So anyway, that's what all that stuff looks like. All right, so before we bounce out of the Azure portal, I want to show you guys our application gallery and how you add applications in here and how you manage that stuff like Salesforce and Workday and things like that. And then the next section that we'll go to will really be focused on the application discovery piece of this. So we've got a really nice tool called the Cloud App Discovery tool that will give you insight into how your users are connecting to these SaaS applications so that you can figure out what applications that you want to make available in the Access portal and how you want to make those applications available. So the last option here, we talked about the Web Application Proxy. The last option here is the application gallery. So when you click into here, you can see that we're federated to over 2,425 applications as of the date that this was recorded. But this number changes. It changed for the last several months pretty frequently, and sometimes by an order of magnitude every day. It's a little less frequent now, but the number just a couple weeks ago was about 15 or so less, just within the last couple of weeks we've added. The featured applications here show the ones that folks are using the most, so things like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Workday and Concur and Dynamics and Google Apps and things like that. But you can just, if there's an app that you want to look up, and I'll just, look up, something like Facebook, for example, or some other ones that are in here. So you can look up any of those, you click on them, and then you just say, click the checkbox, and it adds it in to the gallery here. And then, of course, the next thing that you would do would be to configure single sign-on. In this particular case, we have the password single sign-on option. We have the existing single sign-on option. For Facebook, this would probably be the one that you would use. And then, of course, you can assign access to users for that particular application. So once again, pretty straightforward as far as setting that stuff up and the different options that we have available there to either do some custom development work, to use the application gallery, or to use the web application proxy. So real quick, one of the other things that I wanted to show before bouncing over to the Cloud App Discovery piece is that we have an app available. This is my iPad again. So there's a My Apps Azure Access Panel application that's available in the Apple App Store. And you can download that, and of course you can log into that, and we enforce multi-factor authentication, all that fun stuff depending on the scenario there. And so, once again, you just click on any of these applications there. This is my reverse proxy, the web application proxy up in Azure, for example. But anyway, this is just real quick. This is the access panel there for all the stuff that we were showing over on the other device. All right, so the next piece that I wanted to cover off on here was the Cloud App Discovery tool. And you can see this is in preview now. The URL for this is appdiscovery.azure.com, if that doesn't show up on the video very well. You can, of course, do a search for Cloud App Discovery Tool. Anyway, all this, the backend for this is all up in Azure Active Directory. Let me click on this and sign in. You need to sign in with an organizational ID. So this needs to be one of your on Microsoft.com accounts. So this is into your Azure subscription. And so one of the things you can see, just real quick, we get some information here up front. The back end piece of this, or the way this really actually works, is through an agent. So if you click up on the cog over here, and you can download the agent, and you can deploy that to computers that people are using to access applications. So you could use Config Manager or Group Policy or something like that to deploy this. And then basically what we do is we just kind of watch the browser and how people are using SaaS-based applications, and we report that information back to you. And so you get this nice screen up front that kind of gives you some information here. But what I want to do is focus on, I want to go back as far as I can, 120 days, and I want to look at all applications. And so we get some information about the number of apps that we've discovered, the number of users that are using the app, or using the agent. Or if you have an agent, you got multiple users connecting to the same computer, we'll identify that as a different user. And then the top apps and things like that. But what's really interesting is when you click down here, you can see, once again, we've pivoted on last 120 days, all apps, and I actually just have this agent running on my own computer that I use all the time for it to get some real-world information. But one of the things you can see up here, the first section here, are these Connect Ready. So these are apps that are out in the gallery, but we haven't, we're connected to our Azure subscription here, so we can see that we actually haven't configured these applications so that people can use them when they log into the panel. So we're telling you, hey, this particular application, let's look at Dropbox, or let's look at YouTube. We have one user that's connecting 161 times, and the most interesting thing here is, here's how much bandwidth is actually being used by these applications, right? It'd be very difficult to try to figure that out, maybe depending on whatever hardware and whatever things you're doing from a firewall, maybe impossible to figure it out. But anyway, you can definitely get a lot of information about how people are using these applications, and then you can click on these and we'll take you over to the Azure Portal and walk you through the process of setting all these applications up. Anyway, this gives you a really good idea of how people are using apps. The next section is the connected apps. So we can actually come down here and look and see Office 365. We can see we've used this 9,000 times, 2 users, over 2 gig of information, etc. There, what's really interesting is if you pick, some application down here, for example, these are the ones that people are using, but we're not federated to them. So there's obviously going to be ones in here like localhost and Microsoft.com and things like that we don't have tiles for. But let's just say, for example, we found one down here. I have no idea what this one is, but let's just say we have a lot of people that are using it. We'd like to make a request to the Azure product team. So we can click on this right here that says suggest for Azure AD pre-integration. But what this really does is just take us over to the Azure feedback portal, and this is just a public URL. It's just feedback.azure.com, and then you can focus in on the various different forms down here. So these are all the different features, capabilities in Microsoft Azure. And then you can enter your improvement or your idea. So this would be maybe, hey, can you guys consider federating to application XYZ? And then you enter your email address, and then the product group team will respond to that request. And you'll get an email and saying, hey, the product group has responded to this, and you can go out and check out what's going on here. Other people can vote on whatever your idea is, whatever your improvement or whatever your idea is. And the way that works is you just click down here, you enter your email address and enter 1, 2, or 3 votes, depending on how important that is for you. And as these get bubbled up, that's what the Azure product group, the Azure engineers are looking at in terms of being able to pivot and be very agile to add features, add new capabilities to Azure. So you can see here, this is a very popular one, obviously, enable legacy Windows Server AD functionality for compute services. You can click in here, you can see more information about that. You can also comment on that, but then one of the things that's good here is you'll actually get some information from the product group, and they're saying, hey, this is actually a planned feature. So anybody that's voted on this, anybody that obviously the person who created this will get an email from the product group saying this is a planned feature. Whenever this goes into, whenever they make an update to this particular post, all the people that voted on this will get an email and let them know that something that they voted on actually was worked on or was improved or has become a feature or something like that. So that's a great way to kind of stay in touch with what's going on in Azure and really be a part of the process in terms of making the platform better and making it potentially work better for you and provide information about scenarios that you'd like to see covered. So that is the Cloud App Discovery tool. Pretty straightforward to use, pretty easy to set up, so now we'll move on to the next section. All right, so the next scenario to cover off on is the self-service password reset. So in this particular case for me, I'm using AD Premium, so I have the ability, I'm obviously using directory synchronization and ADFS, all that fun stuff, and I want to give my users the ability to reset their password from basically the cloud here. So we're logged into the Office 365 portal, and I want to basically reset that password hash all the way back to my domain controllers on-prem. So you could go directly to the website, which is just passwordreset.microsoftonline.com, or any user that would log into any of the Microsoft properties, you're going to see something down here that says can't access your account. So when you click on that, it's going to take us over to the passwordreset.microsoftonline. And now watch this up here. This is part of that tenant branding. So I showed you a little bit of that in the Active Directory portal where you can go and do some of the customize the tenant branding. And this is where that comes into play. So somebody can log in with their credentials here. And you can see when I hit tab, it's actually going to change that to my corporate logo. So now your users at least get a little bit more of a warm and fuzzy that this is a Microsoft website, but I typed in my username and password, and so now it looks a little bit more, at least I have the corporate logo or something like that up there. Now the next thing to do here, and I'll probably mess this up a couple times, KMWM8SPX maybe, is, of course, I messed that up. So let's do, XDXM. So what we're doing here is looking up our credential. And since we're federated and since this is a hybrid identity and this lives up in Azure, and we've also allowed our users to register with the first time they access the portal so they could enter an alternate credential here, an alternate email. Things like our mobile phone, for example, are in, it's an attribute that exists in our on-prem Active Directory. We have our mobile phone in there. And so now we've got a couple of different options. So we can do, as I showed you in the portal previously, you can force one or two of these options. And I won't go through the process here to reset the password because it doesn't really accomplish anything to do that other than I have to go back and reset it to the what I was using before. Anyway, you can see we've masked out a number of the different characters here. So the user would actually have to supply, whatever their phone number is, knowing that it ends in the digit 69, which is my cell phone number. So you could do a text to the phone, you could call the phone, or you could send an email to this alternate email account, and it'll give you a link to come back and reset the password. So you've got several different options there, and of course once you reset the password, it immediately resyncs that pass fast as the electrons can flow on the internet back to your domain controllers on-prem, and will reset your password on-prem. So you could essentially shut this tab down, come back over, open the Office 365 portal tab, and log in with whatever the new credentials were that your user supplied. All right, so the last thing I want to cover off on here as a part of this video is the multi-factor authentication self-service or the user portal. Now I'm logged in as a user over here, just a test user that I have. And let me see here if I can minimize this guy and show you the server itself. So this is the user. And we've got this user enabled, and we've got some information here like mobile app devices. We have not registered a device yet, which we'll see here in a second, and just a lot of other information in here as well. Give the ability for users to change their device, and just some general stuff in here as well. We can set the default scenario that we want for them, all kinds of different stuff. We can clear their security questions. In this particular, I've already registered this user, so they already have security questions, but I can clear all those for them. They would be prompted to re-enter those questions again. So anyway, this is what we set this up on the server side, and of course we're integrated with Active Directory, so we can come out here and sync these from time to time. We can import. We can also test multi-factor authentication for a user as well, so we can come out here and put a password in, whatever authentication, and do a test for multi-factor as well as we set users up. So anyway, that's what it looks like a little bit anyway from the back end side, but what I wanted to focus on was just the portal experience here. So we're logged in. I'm going to bounce back and forth between like my iPad, for example, and show what this looks like. But now that I'm logged in, if I'm a user, if I'm doing some testing, for example, and I want to set up a one-time bypass because I'm testing some application, and every time I log in, having to do a multi-factor authentication or something is annoying to me, then I can turn this off for a certain amount of time. I can also come in here and change the default method. So we have the phone call method, the text message, the mobile app, which is the push notification that I showed at the beginning of the demo, and then the OAuth token, which is the secure ID kind of a scenario, right? The hard token, but you're using your phone or your device for that versus having to carry around some kind of a fob or something on your keychain or something like that. We can also come in here and change our phone number if we wanted to do that. And then here's the part where we do the activation of the mobile application. So if we want to run that app, or if we want to activate, so of course, first of course we have to download the app from the Apple App Store, or from the Windows Phone Store, or from Google Play or something like that on the device. But then once we've done that, we can come out here and generate an activation code, and we get this QR code that you can see here. And so I'll stop and then I'll switch over to the iPad here and kind of show you what the experience is in terms of connecting to and setting this up on the device itself. All right, so here I am back over on my iPad, and if you remember, we've got the web page up over here with the QR code, and we want to register our device. So it's pretty simple to do that. I'll just click on the Add button here. Now, we can actually enter the code or enter the URL, but what's easier is to actually scan the barcode here. So here I have the app set up. You'll see that it grabs that once I grab the QR code. I know that happened really fast, but we basically use the camera on the device to be able to make that connection and add that account to this particular scenario here. So you can see here that I've got two different accounts using the same device. I can go ahead and set that scenario up, and now I've got the token for both my test account that I just added and of course the Han Solo account that I was using before. So let's jump back over to the web interface and kind of see what that looks like. All right, so now we're back over here at the web page again, and we've used our iPad to connect to the QR code and add that scenario. So now we can actually come back over here. If we click on the Activate Mobile app, we'll see that we've got my iPad out there, and we can deactivate that if we need to do that. Of course, we can generate another activation code and use our Windows device or something like that, so we can actually have this code available on multiple devices. The last thing we can do down here is change security questions. So we've got a number of different security questions that come pre-populated, but in the admin tool, you can go create your own security questions. You can delete these and create all new ones, or use these and then use some other ones. And then the reason why it's asking for 4 is because in the administrative tool, we've set that somebody has to answer 4 questions. And for us, the security questions are a fallback mechanism. There is no way to use only security questions as the second factor of authentication. But if you fail that first factor, your phone doesn't ring or something like that, or you enter the wrong PIN code or something like that, then we can fail back to the security questions. And so anyway, the user can come out here and self-service that piece as well. So that wraps up this part of the demo. I want to thank you guys very much for hanging out for the duration. Hopefully this was insightful. Learn a little bit more about the AD Premium features and some of the use case scenarios and what some of that stuff looks like and how to do some of the configuration. I have up on the screen here just you can do a search on bing.com for Enterprise Mobility Suite, and it'll take you right to our home page here where you can download a data sheet, talk a little bit, or learn more about the solution itself. You can do some trial stuff here as well, trying Microsoft Intune, rights management services, all that kind of fun stuff, and then some deployment guidance and some of those kinds of things as well. So thanks again for the attention. Appreciate it, and good luck. Thanks again. Bye.